The so-called right to die always devolves into the duty to die, especially when the money runs out. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet. This is Breakpoint. 6 years ago, Sean Tagert of British Columbia was diagnosed with ALS, otherwise known as Lou Gehrig's disease. An ALS diagnosis is essentially a death sentence. There's no known cure. People with ALS eventually lose control over most of the muscles in their bodies, including the ones that enable them to breathe. Despite his grim diagnosis, Tagert decided to live as long as he could for the sake of his son, who was 6 years old at the time. So for 5 years, he's advocated on behalf of ALS patients, and he's become a symbol of someone who refused to give up. And then, last month, Tagert informed his friends that he decided to opt for physician-assisted suicide under Canada's medical assistance in dying law. Why? Well, Tagert didn't give up because he believed the fight for life was no longer worth it. He gave up because those who could have helped him refused. Totally paralyzed and requiring a ventilator to breathe, Tagert required full-time care in order to live at home with his son. But government medical officials would only provide 20 hours of care a day. Thus, he could only get the round-the-clock care he needed by moving to a group facility nearly 5 hours away from his home and his son. Tagert appealed his decision that was separating him from his boy, and officials never responded. A Facebook post in Tagert's honor put it this way: the few institutional options on hand would have offered vastly inferior care while separating him from his family, and likely would have hastened his death. And so, in Tagert's mind, physician-assisted suicide had become the least horrible option. His death has set off shockwaves throughout Canada. Dr. Leonie Herx, a palliative care specialist and opponent of Canada's euthanasia law, is harshly calling her country to task. We need, she wrote, a public outcry around people's rights to access care, to support them in choosing a right to life rather than just a right to death. We need to ensure physical needs are met before we get to a place where people are feeling like death is the only option. Now, of course, government officials first failed Tagert by making physician-assisted suicide legal in the first place. The medical assistance in dying law, like all pro-death legislation, sent a crystal clear message that euthanasia is an acceptable alternative to palliative care. Inevitably, this will lead to decisions in which life is priced out compared to the cost of resources. When the resources are scarce, the right to die will become the duty to die. In Tagert's case, scarce was about $200 a day. This scenario, as the disability rights group Not Dead Yet has pointed out, isn't limited to Canada. What happened in British Columbia can happen in Belgium, and in Oregon, and in New Zealand, and in Colorado. Anywhere physician-assisted suicide is legal. In fact, the U.S. likely spends less on in-home health care services than Canada does. As Pew Research has reported, Medicaid and private insurance plans offer scant or no coverage for home visits for patients with serious, debilitating conditions who are not hospitalized or in hospice. So are we ready for this, church? It took us a couple decades to catch up on all the ways we could help protect preborn life. Are we ready for the fight now against legalized euthanasia? Are we ready to protect the vulnerable after birth? The church has learned to support expectant mothers, to make apologetic arguments for when life begins, to offer ultrasound insight into the womb. What do we now need to learn about palliative care, debilitating disease, and family support? How do we help those who lack the resources to keep themselves alive? How do we get creative? Do things like medical sharing hold promise? Will we support faith-based hospices like we support pregnancy resource centers? These are tough questions. So please, before we give up on this, let's open our Bibles to Matthew 25. For Breakpoint, I'm John Stonestreet.